Was the Conservative Party right to suspend its former deputy chairman? Can the Commons Speaker last the week? And why are so many young people off sick? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Rachel Maclean, Labour MP Luke Pollard, political correspondent for The Guardian Kieran Stacey, and the opinion and features editor of City AM Alice Denby. On today's programme.
Lee's comments weren't acceptable, they were wrong, and that's why he's had the whip suspended.
Former Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson is no longer a Conservative MP after saying this.
They've got control of Corn and they've got control of London. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates.
Now Labour calls for former Prime Minister Liz Truss to be suspended after failing to call out the labelling of anti-Islam activist Tommy Robinson as a hero. Does the Conservative Party have a problem with Islamophobia? Also today, are young people suffering a mental health crisis? And
this is the last bit of green open space in the west of Maidstone. If it is lost, it will be lost forever.
Builders versus blockers. Who should politicians side with? Let's start with this headline in the Financial Times. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, braced for tough week as SNP demands new Gaza vote in Commons. Yes, MPs are back in Westminster today after last week's chaotic and acrimonious Opposition Day Commons debate on a ceasefire in Gaza. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, is under serious pressure after he broke with convention in the way he handled the debate, and 71 MPs have so far called for him to go. My opening question, starting with you, Rachel, is can Lindsay Hoyle survive the week?
Well, I think he's definitely got questions to answer, and the real questions are really who's pressured him. Has the Labour Party pressured him? Has someone from the Labour Party pressured him? And has he bowed to that political pressure?
Should he go?
Well, I think I have signed the EDM.
This
is a matter of public record. Yep. I've signed it in my capacity as Member of Parliament. So I think he does have questions to answer. But it is more about who has pressured him, who from the Labour Party, whether it was Keir Starmer, whether it was a Labour Party official, who asked him to change the order in the House of Commons to disadvantage the smaller party whose day for a debate it was.
Yes.
And he's made changes to procedure for political reasons. That's what he's done. So the questions there really are for the Labour Party.
I understand your explanation, but just to be clear, if you've signed the early day motion, it says that you have no confidence in the Speaker. So therefore, yes, he should resign.
In my view, I have no confidence in him. Right. Yes, that's my position.
And what about you, Luke? And we'll come to responding to some of the remarks just made by Rachel in terms of Labour's role. But can he survive the week?
Yes, I think he made the right decision last week in putting up a proposition where all three parties would be able to vote on their proposition. It only fell apart when the government pulled their motion, realising that more Tory MPs would vote for Labour's motion than their own. That's what caused the chaos. But throughout all of this, we're losing sight of the issue that we should be focusing on, and that is the situation in Gaza. We should be talking about how we end the violence, how we get more aid in, how we get hostages out. Yeah. But this petty politicking about procedure, I'm afraid, is really frustrating because it's not dealing with, in theory, the reason that we all could have agreed last week. We all wanted the fighting to stop. Let's focus on that rather than the one-upmanship that we get from the government and the SNP at the moment. Focus on the people in Gaza.
Of which Labour played a major part. I mean, it is a plague on all your houses. You were the one who said the petty politicking, precisely, and all of you contributed to that. So that we can agree with, that it did result from petty party
last
politics.
Week was not a good
but
week.
on Labour, hand on heart, in that meeting that Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, and the party's chief whip, no clerks there, they had that meeting with Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and at no point, is it your understanding, was he put under pressure to bow, as Rachel says, to pressure from the Labour Party to run their amendment?
No, no pressure on there. We made a strong case that the argument should be put, as parties do every week, making a strong case for them. But if Rachel's got any evidence rather than just slurs, she should raise it. I don't think there is any evidence of this. So therefore, I think we should have a situation where we can focus on Gaza, because I don't think there is any evidence.
Well, let's see if Rachel's got any evidence.
I just don't think you've got any evidence whatsoever for your comment that we pulled the motion because we didn't have the numbers. That's absolute nonsense, I'm afraid, Luke, and you do know that.
So there's still no evidence, is what I get from that answer. No evidence of this, just slurs. And we'll see more of this as the election approaches.
You just said yourself that they made a strong case.
Right.
Yeah, as indeed your chief whip went in and made a strong case as well. So,
our
the
chief
point about
whip
this one
did
here
nothing
is,
except stick to the procedure, the convention. You know very well that there's a huge difference between what was done by the speaker on that debate. It was not convention. He broke convention, and he said himself he did it because he was worried about security concerns of MPs. Now that may well be legitimate, and that is his role. But the point is, he broke precedent, he changed the order of debates, and that has had serious consequences.
Still no evidence.
All right, well, the office of the Speaker.
Have you got any evidence that pressure was actually brought to bear in the way you say on the Speaker?
Well, we would like to see what happened in that meeting, what was said, and the Labour Party have not yet come clean about what was said.
No evidence to back your slur.
All right.
Let's focus on Gaza, not this slur.
We're happy to
that you
focus on
as
Gaza.
I said,
We must
the
do
plague on
that.
all your houses when it comes to not actually focusing on the debate. Can Sir Lindsay Hoyle survive the week?
I think he can survive the week. At the moment, the government's not piling in behind people like Rachel. We haven't heard Rishi Sunak saying he's not got any confidence in the Speaker. But that is the kind of one question that remains, really. It usually, I mean, there isn't really any formal way to remove a Speaker. But it is usually the case, as happened with Michael Martin years ago, if the government and if the Prime Minister let it be known that they don't have confidence in the Speaker,
it would be very difficult.
They usually step aside. But, I mean, it's interesting watching that debate between Luke and Rachel there, because they're both right and they're both wrong. There is evidence for both of their claims. There is evidence that Keir Starmer put pressure on Lindsay Hoyle. It might not have been a threat, but we know that he said, look, we think our MPs are in danger here. And that is pressure. That is moral pressure.
Because Lindsay Hoyle said as much, that he was worried
Absolutely.
about the
we know
safety
that
of
Lindsay
MPs.
Hoyle said that. And we know, I'm sorry, Rachel, but we know that your whips thought that they were going to lose that vote on that amendment. And that is exactly why they... We've spoken to senior Conservative sources who've confirmed that. And that is the only reason to pull that vote at that time. So, you know, there is plenty of evidence for both claims.
Whichever way or whichever viewpoint you subscribe to in this particular debate, Alice, do you think he can survive the week, the Speaker?
I think it's going to be challenging for him. I think, you know, he's clearly become collateral damage in this incredibly unseemly party political split. Let's be clear, what really happened was the SNP tried to embarrass Labour. Labour then put pressure on the Speaker or whatever they did. You know, we can talk about precedents and conventions, but really this is purely party political. It has nothing to do with Gaza. It makes absolutely not a jot of difference to the situation in the Middle East. And I think people watching will just think, as you said, a plague on all your houses.
Let's move on and talk about this headline in The Guardian. Rishi Sunak urged to speak out by Tory peer as Islamophobia row deepens. This is in response to what the former Deputy Conservative Party Chairman Lee Anderson said in an interview with GB News on Friday about the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is Muslim. Let's have a listen.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well. And this stems with Khan. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates.
Rachel, are Lee Anderson's words that we've just heard there Islamophobic?
Well, Lee Anderson's words were wrong. They were unacceptable, and that's why
I know that we've heard that from the Prime Minister,
removed.
but are they Islamophobic?
So I am just repeating to you what the Prime Minister said. And don't forget, he's had the whip removed.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister's been very clear. He was asked to apologise for those comments. They were wrong, and the comments were unacceptable. We all have to be very careful of the language that we use.
Yeah.
Using words like Islamophobic, we have to be careful about how we use those words, because we are seeing a situation where tensions are very inflamed at the moment, and people naturally are very concerned. They're concerned about the protests that they're seeing.
Yeah.
They're concerned, as we were just discussing earlier, about the threats of violence against MPs. So that's the reason why I'm not using the word Islamophobic, because it's a word that does come with a lot of meaning behind it. So we have to be careful about how we use those words. But I want to be very clear about one thing, which is that the Conservative Party is a party that accepts everybody from whatever background they come. And we have very robust procedures. As you've just seen, when those words were said that were unacceptable, then the whip was removed.
All right. Well, you don't want to say whether the comments are Islamophobic. And there is a big difference between saying the comments are wrong and whether they are offensive to a group of people whose religion is Muslim or Islam. On the back of that, if he apologises, Lee Anderson, would you be happy to have him back in the party?
Yes, I would be, yes. But these are matters for the whips, obviously.
Right. So you're just waiting for him to apologise. Not that he is saying that he's going to apologise. In fact, he's come out with more words, and we'll come on to those in just a moment. What do you make? If he apologised, do you think he should be allowed back into the Conservative Party, Luke?
No, I think he's unambiguously Islamophobic. It's dangerous, the language he used, and it was racist. But if the Prime Minister, who had to be forced into withdrawing the whip on Lee Anderson, is supposedly taking this strong stance, as we just heard from Rachel, that strong stance should also apply to Suella Braverman, who said Islamists run Britain, to Liz Truss, who stood on a panel with someone who praised Tommy Robinson and didn't call them out. You've got to be strong on this, just as Keir has done in anti-Semitism within our party. Where there is hate in a party, you've got to act on it. You've got to be strong on it, and that hasn't happened here in the way that it needs to, because in none of our parties, either the Labour Party or the Conservatives, should there be any place for hate. No place whatsoever, and I'm afraid the language that we're hearing from some Conservative MPs and the leaked WhatsApp messages from yesterday, that's on the front page of one of the papers today, that's basically saying it's
Rachel,
OK. It's not OK. This is unacceptable, racist language that we should shut down.
Rachel?
Well, the Prime Minister's been very clear, and he acted very quickly. And I think, Luke, quite frankly, we look at what happened with your Rochdale candidates, and Keir Starmer had to be dragged kicking and screaming to take any action whatsoever about the kind of comments that he made about the Jewish people in our country, and those anti-Semitic comments that he made about the Israel-Gaza conflict. They were shocking. They were absolutely appalling.
And that's why we're not having him as a candidate.
It took Keir Starmer a long time. It took him days, and it took a sort of media outcry for him to do anything. So the idea that he is strong on this, I'm afraid, is completely. Can you just let me finish my comment? The idea that he's strong on this, I think, doesn't hold any water at all. I agree with you that there should be no place for any kind of hatred, whether anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. And I think what the Prime Minister's done sends a very clear signal.
Right.
But not about Suella Braverman, though.
But why do you think Lee Anderson hasn't apologised? If it's a very strong message and the Prime Minister has been very clear that they were wrong and unacceptable comments, why do you think he's not apologised?
Well, that's a question for him. You have to ask him.
Well, it's not just a question for him, because actually this headline in the Telegraph, Red Wall revolt over Anderson sacking. This is what Luke was referring to. Private WhatsApps reveal MPs, Conservative MPs, are facing a voter backlash over handling of racism row. They didn't want to see Lee Anderson sacked. What does that say? That other Tory MPs are saying we're facing a voter backlash because you have taken away the Tory whip?
So I haven't seen the WhatsApps, and nor have I seen the Daily Telegraph. So it's quite
they're named. These MPs
they
definitely exist because these MPs are named.
On your points, but what I would say, I do think that we are very quick, I think, sometimes to shut down people who raise legitimate concerns. There are concerns about Islamic extremism. And we should be able to talk about those without being called racist. So I think what Lee Anderson did was, obviously he did that in a very unacceptable and wrong way.
In a racist way.
But what we have seen, regardless of that, last week we saw protests outside our own House of Commons, extremely aggressive and violent protests from Islamist extremists, and we should be able to say we are concerned about what we're seeing on our capital city week after week after week, and also, are the police and is the Mayor of London doing enough to make sure that everybody feels safe in our country? Well, so this is a broader debate. Clearly the way that Lee Anderson has expressed it is wrong and unacceptable, and that's why we have to be careful about language. But there is a genuine security issue, and people are watching this and wanting strong action to keep people in our country safe.
Is there a legitimate concern in the way Rachel has just expressed in terms of protesters on the streets? I mean, that was the question. after Wednesday's debate as to whether or not MPs were under pressure to vote in a particular way, whether they were being cowed by protesters that were out on the streets protesting for a Palestinian state, but that there were claims of extremist elements and have been in those protests.
I mean, it's certainly true that there's been some really violent threats and some utterly unacceptable behaviours from a small group of people. But what we've got to do here is make sure we're focusing the efforts on that unacceptable behaviour, not a right to protest, nor using language that somehow seeks to legitimise what was a racist outburst by someone who shouldn't have been saying those words, who doesn't want to apologise for it, and yet still would be accepted back into the Conservative Party, is what I heard from Rachel. This is something that we need to purge our party of this hate, and that is not what I heard from you.
It's not for me to accept people back in.
But you said you were happy having him back in.
I personally, but that's up to me. But in terms of who comes back in, that's for the whips and the Prime Minister.
What other racist comments would be acceptable in your party? You just agreed there's no acceptability for racism or hate in our parties. So therefore, that follows that there shouldn't be place for people who are racist and saying hateful things.
And there's not. He's not in our party now.
But you're happy getting him back in?
He has to. If he apologises, then there may be a route back in. But as I said many times, this is not a matter for me. You asked me my personal opinion, I've given it you.
It seems to me that this party in government has run its course and we need to have a general election now, because this is an unacceptable bit. It's one thing to trash public services. It's another thing to divide our communities in the way that we're seeing that could have severe consequences. That's why we need a general election, because this saga can't keep going on.
There are tensions within the Conservative Party, as we're hearing. I think we can show a tweet, and if not, I'll read it out, from Saida Varsi, a Conservative peer and former co-chair of the party. This attack on Sadiq Khan is very deliberate. It's an attempt to stigmatise, stereotype and silence British Muslims and stop younger generations of British Muslims from entering public life. She's referring to the comments from Lee Anderson. The standards we hold Labour to on racism are the standards we should hold ourselves to on racism. To do anything else makes us hypocrites. Is she right, Rachel?
So, look, I think people have a lot of different views about this, and Saida herself has often criticised the party. Of course, she's a member of the party, and we are very proud to have people from all different backgrounds in our own party. And we do need to be careful about language and the words we've used, as I've repeated multiple times.
All right. What do you make of this discussion and this debate, stemming in part from the comments, the very personal comments made by Lee Anderson about the Muslim Mayor of London?
It seems to me like a complete mess. The idea, this is not just saying, Lee Anderson wasn't saying that there is a problem with Islamic extremism on the streets of London. He was making a very specific point. He was accusing the mayor of being controlled by a secretive cabal of extremists who are dictating his policies. Now, that is exactly the kind of terms that people use to talk about Jewish people in very anti-Semitic ways. That's exactly the tone of the comments that Labour has had a problem with for many, many years. So to watch Tory ministers and Tory MPs almost trying to make apologies for that and to suggest, well, maybe it's not racism or it's not Islamophobia, really reminds me of those rows during the Jeremy Corbyn years over exactly the same issue, but with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Alice?
Yeah, I think there's plenty to criticise about Sadiq Khan, but the idea that he's controlled by Islamists is plainly absurd, and I don't think Lee Anderson would have said that about someone who wasn't a Muslim. And I do think that this whole row is distracting from the very serious issue of extremist elements in these protests that we've seen. And frankly, yeah, I think Lee Anderson, the interesting thing to me about him is that he presents a problem for the Conservative Party, because in a way he's kind of the 2019 election in human form, right? He went on the same journey as many voters, having been a Labour councillor, then converting to the Tories in 2019, winning one of those red wall seats. And I think now we're seeing the kind of problems that the Conservatives are having by having reached so far outside their natural heartlands.
Right, well, let's pick up on the points that you've made about extremist elements that exist or may exist in society, because in the debate last Wednesday evening, this was beamed onto Big Ben. I think we can show you the pictures, which is the chant from the river to the sea. Controversial, seen as anti-Israel and anti-Semitic by many people. Why didn't Sadiq Khan stop that happening? He's the Mayor of London, the Police and Crime Commissioner. Why didn't he stop that happening?
Well, that's operational policing. That's down to the policing on the day.
He
That should be there.
He could have come out and said something about it, couldn't he? Afterwards, he could have made a stand and said that is unacceptable. And I think the police should have stopped it. He could have done that, but he didn't. I'm just asking why.
I mean, Sadiq is a very strong ally of our Jewish community in London and is notably praised by Jewish communities for the strength that he has shown over many years in doing so. That projection was unacceptable, but that comes down to on-the-day policing. There's a clear distinction. I'm not a fan of police and crime commissioners, but there's a clear distinction between political oversight, that is the role of a police and crime commissioner, and the day-to-day responsibility for policing that comes down to the operational command of policing. And if we mix those two up, as sometimes is the case about whether a police and crime commissioner should be doing X, Y and Z, then you're removing the distinction between those two. But Sadiq is absolutely clear. There is no place for anti-Semitism in the capital and no place for it in the Labour Party either. We need to have that same rigour in every single other political party for every other form of racism and hate.
Right. Does that satisfy you, Rachel?
No. No, not at all. And I think this is a highly provocative, and some Jews feel it is a genocidal chant. It's highly offensive at the very, very least. We've heard Andrew Percy, who's a Jewish MP standing up in the House of Commons, saying he himself feels unsafe.
Well, Luke's
and many
called
other
it out,
British
but it's
Jews.
about whether Sadiq Khan could or should have done anything about it.
Yes, and I think he should have done. I think the Met Police should have done as well. And I'm asking questions in the House of Commons about this.
All right, well, let's have a look at this headline, because it's not just Lee Anderson, although he has lost the whip. In the Daily Telegraph, Islamists are bullying Britain into submission. This is from the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. This isn't just about my colleagues in Parliament. Our values and freedoms are under attack in all walks of life. And also, Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, is now... There are calls from Labour for her to lose the whip. I'm going to play you in a moment something from the Conservative Political Action Conference in the United States, and it's of Liz Truss in conversation with the former Donald Trump strategist and right-winger Steve Bannon. And he says, as you will hear, that Tommy Robinson, who is a British anti-Islam activist, he hails him as a hero. Let's have a listen.
Hang on, I don't understand this. The grooming situation, Tommy Robinson, all these heroes fought it, the rape situation, and in that community, you're going to have a special election, and you may have a radical jihadist party send somebody to Commons after all that problem?
That is correct.
Liz Truss did not call that out. Should she have done, Rachel?
So I think you're sort of almost holding people to impossibly high standards. If you expect everybody to just interrupt somebody in a live situation. I mean, I don't know whether Liz heard what was said. I don't know whether she was aware what was said. I don't know what the context was. I mean, in a sense, we're several steps away from somebody who is in a situation in a different country.
Yeah, but
she
does know who Steve Bannon is and what he represents, doesn't she? She should have been alert to what he was saying.
Yeah, maybe she should. But I think if you are now suggesting that anybody who's in a room with somebody making an unacceptable comment, if they don't call that out, they're somehow bad. To me, this seems to be a degree further than most people would accept.
That was precisely the attack on Labour for what happened with the Rochdale candidates, right? And so you've got to call out hate in anyone in a leadership position, anyone in any party, but Liz Truss, who formerly was the Prime Minister of this country, to hear the words that Tommy Robinson is a hero and to sit there and say they're correct.
It's not the same at all, Luke, because your candidate himself said those things.
Yes, and Steve Bannon said those things next to Liz Truss just there. You've said one's acceptable, one's not.
Liz Truss didn't say it. That's the difference. They came out of your candidate's mouth. She was in a room with someone saying something acceptable.
You should always call out hate wherever it is.
The two
she
things
should have called out hate there.
Please don't interrupt me. The two things are different.
All right, let me get from the commentators. Kieran, what do you make of the call by Labour for Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, to also lose the whip, be suspended from the Conservative Party? And no doubt they think Suella Braverman also has questions to answer. But first on Liz Truss.
Well, I think Rachel's right that there is a different order of magnitude in standing there while somebody else says something offensive and not calling out and saying something offensive yourself. I think that's a fair point to make. I think the problem with Liz Truss here, and it is true, I think, in parts of the Conservative Party, is she's put herself in a position that is quite compromising simply by being on that stage. And by standing there next to Steve Bannon, we all know who Steve Bannon is, we all know what his views are, by doing that kind of cosy interview with him, you open yourself up to all sorts of problems. Now, I spent 4 years in Washington as Washington correspondent and got to see that type of politics up very close. These people are very skilled manipulators. They'll put you in positions that you don't want to be. They'll you end up endorsing things that you don't really mean, especially Steve Bannon. He's very good at that. And if you put yourself in that position, you are going to be vulnerable to that. But, you know, if Liz Truss wants to make a big name for herself out in the US as somebody who calls out the deep state and all the rest of it, who plays into that narrative, that's what's going to happen.
Alice?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to be taken seriously when accusing one MP of Islamophobia, then accusing someone of just having sat next to someone who said something offensive, I think it distracts from the seriousness of the allegation. I agree with you that Liz Truss is putting herself in a compromising position. She's becoming a bit of an embarrassment, I think. But no, I think just sitting next to someone who calls Tommy Robinson a hero is...
Would you have called it out if you were in Liz Truss's position?
Well, it's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, I'd be surprised that an American even knew who Tommy Robinson was, frankly. And yes, I hope I'd have said something, but we can all, you know, we all make mistakes and we can all be in, you know, can
I'd
all
like
hope
to think that Liz Truss would think of
better.
it as a mistake. My worry here is that this is a deliberate type of politics which is seeking to divide people, which is muddying the waters about what's hateful and what's not. That's attacking people and dividing our communities rather than bringing them together. I think in that we have to be really careful about it, and that's why people in Liz's shoes, in our shoes as MPs, have to call it out wherever it appears, in our own parties and in others.
I think you're overestimating what influence domestically something Liz Truss says in America will have on communities here at home.
Let's leave it there. Let me show you this headline in The Times. Poor mental health keeps young adults out of work. Now, this is referring to young people in their early 20s being more likely to be out of work because of poor mental health compared with people in their 40s. It's according to new research from the Resolution Foundation, a think tank focusing on people on lower incomes. This, though, is how the Daily Mail is covering it. Report says young people increasingly blame mental health for being out of work, but critics question if it's all just what they call snowflakery or Generation Sick Note. Let's talk to the report author and senior economist at the Resolution Foundation, Louise Murphy. Louise, tell us about the research. What did you find?
Good afternoon. So what we found really as the backdrop to this report was that there's been a rising number of young people reporting poor mental health. So by 2021, around 1 in 3 young people aged 18 to 24 reported a common mental health problem such as anxiety or depression, up from around 1 in 4 in 2000. And this is having real world impacts. There's been a lot of debate about, you know, the root causes of this, but I think what is clear is that it's really having a concrete impact on young people's lives. For example, what we focused on is the impact that it's having on their education and employment. And one of the really striking findings is that there's been a big increase in the number of young people not working due to poor health. That number's doubled in the last decade. And as you said, that now means that young people in their early 20s are actually more likely to be out of work due to ill health than those in their early 40s.
And what do you make of the Mail's headline, putting it down to snowflakery?
Yes, lots of people, when they hear about young people reporting poor mental health, jump to that conclusion and think that it's all just about you know, reporting things differently or discussing things differently. I mean, of course, the elephant in the room is that there has been a big shift in how we talk about and think about mental health over the past few decades. There's no denying that. But what we're seeing is more than just a bit of, you know, discussion or labelling. When young people, you know, report these issues in the data that we use, it's not just self-reporting a problem, it's saying that this is having a real impact on my life. For example, it's preventing me from getting a good night's sleep. It's meaning I don't get enjoyment from my day-to-day activities. And we're also seeing this come up in some other types of data. For example, we've seen an increase in the number of people prescribed antidepressants from GPs. We're also seeing an increase in the number of young people claiming disability benefits for mental health reasons. And to get those benefits, you have to go through a pretty stringent test. there's a long process.
All right, Louise, stay with us while we discuss it. Alice, what do you make? Where are you? Is this generation sick note and young people slacking off work, or, as the research suggests, there is a growing problem with mental health illness being suffered by young people?
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising that young people are suffering with their mental health. This is the generation that had 2 years of their lives taken away by COVID, a generation who looks at their future prospects, their prospects of owning a home, for example, the prospects of, an ever-increasing debt and tax burden to pay for the social care of an older generation that never had to make the same sacrifices. I think having a mental health problem is a fairly rational response to the situation today for a lot of young people. It's a bleak time.
Right. I mean, Kieran, there is a broad spectrum when it comes to mental health issues. Is society also partly contributing to this idea of young people feeling stress every day, feeling unable, therefore, to go to work, not using the label snowflake, but that there is, perhaps post the pandemic, this inability to see beyond that?
I think it's really important, and I think it's underappreciated how significant it is to the rest of your working life, the circumstances in which you left education and entered the workforce. So I entered the workforce just after the 2008 crash, and I am part of a few years, really, of contemporaries who always felt slightly insecure in the workplace, so always wanted to work that bit harder, maybe stay in the office a bit longer, always just felt a little bit like they needed to graft very hard to stay in work at all, because we'd seen what had happened in the last few years before that. I think a few years afterwards, I've noticed a slightly different attitude among people entering the workforce, where they feel like, well, why should I work harder when these are what my hours are in the contract? So I think we shouldn't underestimate how massive an impact going into the workforce, just as the pandemic happened, has had and will continue to have on this generation. How
worried are you, Rachel, about the wider impacts of young people missing work because of poor mental health?
Yeah, definitely. Of course I am. I mean, I've got 4 children and they're all broadly within that age range. And I think, people of my age need to be very, very sensitive to the differences of going into work, just as I think Kieran has set out, I think, very, very well. It is really important that we think about what support is needed for young people. I think it's welcome that young people can now report and get the help more than perhaps they used to be able to do. So, of course, we are seeing more people coming forward, and therefore we must put the support into education. We must put the support into mental health services, which the government is doing across the board. And we must think about how we help people to return to work in the right way, because obviously we know that being in work is better for mental health, but we have to make the right tailored support available for everybody.
Just before I come to you, Lou, Louise, is that sort of support and help there that's been described by Rachel or not?
So there definitely is support, and it's true over the last 5-10 years there has been some big improvements. For example, we've seen the introduction of mental health support teams within schools and colleges, and that's a really welcome move. We know that young people and children really appreciate and find it useful when they get support within school or college. It's where they go every day. It's a place that many young people feel comfortable in and that they trust. But there's definitely still some gaps and areas where we can do better, and a particular area that we think is important is focusing on colleges, because we know that it's young people with both low levels of qualifications and with poor mental health who are especially disadvantaged when it comes to finding work. And so we should think about those young people in colleges, who by and large are those young people not going down the A-level and university track, and increase the support in there.
Are young people just more willing to talk about their mental health problems, if they have them, than older generations? And that's why this research underlines the sort of numbers of people who are suffering.
Well, I hope so, because the way to get the support is to talk about it, to be honest about the challenges that everyone is facing, and then to have support and services match that concern. But mental health services are on their knees across the country at the moment, and that's why we need to have more investment going into it. So as a party, we want to hire 8,500 more mental health professionals and have a mental health professional in every single school setting and education setting to be able to support people. But we do need people to be able to feel not only that they can come forwards which is important, but then secondly, that the services are there to support them. And the CAMS, mental health services for young adults, are really struggling at the moment. They've been underfunded for some time, and if we want to get young people back into the workforce, which I think we all want to, we've got to address this at its root cause. That's not using a big stick of sanctions, which increasingly for this cohort we're seeing government use. It's giving the support opportunities for them to help re-enter the workforce with the help they need.
Thank you to Louise Murphy for joining us. Let's talk about housing and specifically a row that's broken out in Maidstone over a housing development proposal on a green piece of land. A group of campaigners are taking on a £1 billion property developer to try to stop new houses being built by registering the land as a village green. Marcella Whittingdale has more. Let's have a look.
It's been nearly 2 years since we visited the Merlin Group here at Bunyard's Farm. New housing estates have been springing up ever closer. Now it's less than a month until a public inquiry decides if this land can be registered as a village green.
We need new houses. Why not here?
This is the last bit of green open space in the west of Maidstone. And we as local residents have been working very hard to preserve it as green space, and if it is lost, it will be lost forever.
The land already has planning permission, and the owner, the Andrew Cheal Will Trust, and developer Barrett David Wilson are keen to build more than 400 houses here. They say permission for recreational access to the land has never been granted, so the application for village green status is not legitimate.
People come onto this space to escape from the day-to-day pressures of life, observe nature, walk. It has a big public health environment benefit as well.
Registering this land as a village green doesn't mean it'll suddenly be transformed into the traditional image of a village green, complete with cricket pitch. It just means that you will not be able to build on it. And in order to do that, you have to prove that local people have been using the area for at least 20 years and that they continue to do so.
Volunteers have spent thousands of hours compiling a case to prove that, getting evidence from 100 people. They've painstakingly put together an 800-page document ahead of the public inquiry and found witnesses who will argue it is common land used by local people for decades.
All across the southeast there is a huge demand for more housing, and Barrett say their development would include affordable housing, green spaces and play areas.
It's the future, isn't it? The population's getting bigger, we're getting more people, even into Maidstone, so we will need the housing. As much as we don't like the idea of it, we are going to need it.
Driving from Westmoreland into this, like new housing's going up everywhere, but whether it's affordable housing, I wouldn't know.
But they seem to be taking a lot of the green sites when they should be using brownfield sites, which are just laying there derelict.
Really just to build more places for people with families and just people that need places in general.
I feel like there should be more houses, but more affordable houses, because it's good and well building new builds, but then they're just as expensive as old houses.
Unlike their opposition, the Merlin Group cannot afford a barrister, so they've set up a Just Giving page to finance as much legal advice as possible. The public inquiry starts on the 19th of March and is expected to last 4 days. After years of effort, these campaigners should know the future of Bunyard's Farm by this summer.
Rachel, you were a housing minister, the 15th, I think, now on to the 16th, the government. Should building go ahead on that piece of land?
Well, clearly that is a local matter. Very much housing is, of course, devolved to local areas, that local authority. The planning system is there for a reason. The whole point of having a planning system is so that ministers sitting in Whitehall don't decide exactly where houses should go. It must be for local people in consultation with their local authorities to decide where that housing would go. Because if you have this sort of top-down approach that I think the Labour Party wants to have and sort of bulldozing over the green belt, that I think is very unpopular and leads to the sort of resistance that you see local people expressing there.
Right, should the building go ahead? Keir Starmer said he would bulldoze through opposition like that.
Well, like Rachel, I don't know the particular concerns about that particular area.
Keir Starmer in the conference
belt
speech was absolutely adamant that you wouldn't allow those sorts of objections to building homes that are much needed in communities across the country, that he just wouldn't let it happen. Those houses would be built. So presumably you would force it.
We do need to build more homes. We do need to build more homes. We need to use the brownfield sites, the grey belt sites that are the kind of like the petrol station in Tottenham that's been described as greenfield, which is a nonsense. We do need to build the 1.5 million homes that as a party we've pledged to go and do. But we should also be clear that building on the green belt has happened. It's increased tenfold since the Conservatives came to power. So we do need to have more homes, but those homes, and the point that was raised at the end of that clip by a number of people, they've got to be affordable. Building executive homes aplenty will not deliver, will not get us out of the housing crisis. We need affordable homes that people can afford to buy and rent.
Are you confident that more homes will be built, many more homes, if Labour get into power?
I think that video showed exactly the problem that ministers are grappling with. You can see how motivated and active these anti-housing campaigners are and how strongly they feel about this. And then at the same time in your video, you had local people, especially the younger people, saying, we need the houses, we can't afford to live here. I mean, it is areas like Maidstone, places where the housing shortage is the most acute, that need housing, and we do need a way to make locals accept it.
Right. I mean, is Keir Starmer going to be able to live up to his rhetoric? He said if we walk step by step with working people, bulldoze through the barriers in their way, lay secure foundations at their feet, mission government our guide, then yes, we can get our future back.
Well, I think even the fact that he mentioned building on the greenfield during his conference speech, as you said, was really interesting. That is a proper dividing line. That is something the Conservatives won't talk about. They don't want to do, essentially, and that Keir Starmer's kind of planted his flag there and said that is something we want to be able to do. If you look at the detail of what he was announcing, it's not that, actually. It's to allow it to be more easy to overcome local opposition in certain circumstances. It's not some great new, huge state-led house building programme, for example, but there are things that Labour are going to do that are quite interesting around land rights and compulsory purchase orders, and there is going to be quite a change, I think, in the planning system.
Right, but voters aren't going to forget either party, are they? I mean, are house prices too high, Rachel?
I mean, look, if Labour were genuinely on the side of the builders, they could have voted to get rid of all these outdated EU rules that we put in front of them in Parliament. They whipped all the people in the Lords to vote against it. We've got 100,000 houses ready to go. Labour stopped us actually getting rid of these EU red tape that would allow us to build these houses in places like Maidstone and around the country.
Got rid of the mandatory targets?
No, that's not true, Alice. No, we didn't get rid of targets. We still have the desire and ambition to build those houses, and in fact we have.
But the mandatory targets did go. Alice is right.
Well, regardless of targets don't deliver houses. What we've delivered is 2.5 million houses since 2010. That is a lot of houses. So the debate about targets is the wrong debate. You need to look at the actual what has been delivered. If you just put targets on those people in Maidstone, they aren't going to accept those houses being built, are they?
Targets do deliver houses.
No,
and
they
there
don't.
is a very specific policy that changed under Michael Gove, and it was this. What used to happen is local authorities had to set their own building plans based on a population-based number. So this algorithm would spit out, this is how many homes you need to build over the next few years, and councils had to stick to it. What Michael Gove changed was that he said, you don't have to stick to it if you can argue it would change the character of a local area. Now, of course, loads of local authorities...
With respect, that's wrong. They still have to demonstrate those numbers and they still have to meet that housing need.
No, it's not mandatory. That's the point.
It is mandatory. It is mandatory.
Set by a population-based estimate.
It's still in the system.
It's still in the system, but they don't have to hit it.
They do have to hit it, and there are penalties if they don't.
If they argue that it would change the character of a local area, they don't have to hit that number. And it's local councils who then have changed. Dozens and dozens and dozens since that policy announcement have changed their own local house building plans.
That's
right.
Not.
Well, all right. Well, we'll get to the bottom of this, and we can come back to this tomorrow if we have time. And I will either correct or not the claims that are being made here. But as I understand it, mandatory house target building has gone. But it does demonstrate how hard you're going to find it. You win the election, let's say, small majority, opposition from Labour MPs, you're going to roll over. You won't build houses any more than the Conservatives have.
No, we have to build the houses because the only way out of the housing crisis is with more homes. But we also have to build the right houses in the right location. That means densification in urban centres. That means changing the planning laws that enable land banking of big housing companies that are not building the homes that have planning permission for. And that means making sure that the homes that are actually built have a mix of for sale, and for rent, so people can genuinely afford it. We're not getting that at the moment.
No, and we'll see, of course, if it happens under a Labour government when the election comes and if you win. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow with, amongst others, the comedian Jeff Norcott. So please join me at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Bye-bye.